All right, today I wanted to do a more long form overview discussing QuailGuard protocol and implementing it on your property and how to integrate that with Quail Safe and what the overall strategy is. So, QuailGuard has been commercially available and in the field for just under a year now. We started in fall of 2024, getting it out there, and we've been working over the last year to collect feedback, set up more dealers, make it available, and continue to educate the public on how to utilize it and collect insight on what results landowners are seeing. So, QuailGuard is a medicated feed that was developed to treat parasites in wild quail. And these parasites are eyeworms and cecal worms primarily. And I think with the active ingredient fenbendazole, there's potentially many other therapeutic benefits to utilizing QuailGuard in the field. QuailGuard is designed and labeled, and we recommend to be utilized twice annually, once in the spring and in the fall, and that revolves around the the life cycle of the parasites and when we are seeing the most transmission. So the parasites are are transmitted and carried, and the intermediate host is our grasshoppers, crickets, arthropods, which are primarily hatching in the spring, and that's when we see an uptick in parasite transmission. So, overall, looking at the protocol, we're going to medicate in the spring to treat the birds prior to nesting, and then we're going to medicate in the fall after the higher transmission period, just to make sure those birds are clean going into the winter months, which are more stressful with less feed availability. So, based on the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch necropsy results in the winter of 24, the 24-25 quail season, we would ask anyone that's out harvesting birds, whether you're utilizing QuailGuard or not, to send in samples to the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch. We'll add some info on that in the description, also on the QuailGuard.com website. As many samples as we can get, that builds the data set and the understanding on how QuailGuard's working in the field. But based on the results from this past season, 24-25 season, the non-medicated ranches had 84.5% birds infected with eyeworms and 96.8% birds infected with cecal worms. So what we do know overall is that yes, these parasites have been around. What we don't understand on a landscape level is what ecological factors have changed to increase the spread of the parasites, how they've changed, and how this is impacting the population dynamics of the quail. And what we're seeing overall over the past 10 years is that we're able to sustain more birds with utilizing and implementing the QuailGuard program. Now, taking a step back before even considering QuailGuard is, as a landowner or a land steward, how are you managing your property? And QuailGuard is not a magic bullet. It's not going to immediately bring back all your quail. We work with a lot of landowners that are in the outer areas of what is now quail country, and they may see some birds, or we may be in the heart of the rolling plains or South Texas where this property should have birds. But if you're not managing your habitat and doing everything you can to improve your usable space and time, and having feed availability throughout the year for the birds, and having good habitat, not overgrazing, QuailGuard's just not for you. It's a tool in the tool belt, and through Quail Safe, a lot of what I do is help landowners integrate the entire program, and whether that's as simple as dish strips, grubbing, just overall habitat improvement, managing for invasive grasses, implementing a good grazing program, where you can just overall manage your habitat, utilizing prescribed fire. All these things stack up to allow you to better manage for quail. And then what we do, and where we've seen the greatest success, is you add the QuailGuard and Quail Safe protocol on top of that, and we've seen overall we're able to carry over more birds year after year. And the properties that are implementing all these strategies and utilizing QuailGuard, we're seeing less birds infected with parasites. We're seeing overall the parasite loads are lower, and we're seeing that these properties are able to put down dogs and find birds. Overall, the call counts are higher, and we're just excited to learn more. So we would implore anyone that's out harvesting birds to submit more samples to the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch. The Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch has some exciting research they're doing to learn more about QuailGuard as well. So we're going to keep learning more and more as we move into the future. Now, we can talk more about the treatment cycles and how that impacts parasite spread. So I think to start with, just understanding we don't have to medicate every bird on a given property. When we think about how these parasites spread throughout a given zone, every additional bird that's medicated is one less carrier of the eggs of that parasite. So if you just think about statistically, every additional bird that you can bring in and treat with QuailGuard is reducing the spread. So we don't know exactly what percentage of birds that needs to be, whether it's 20%, 30%, even at 30% of the birds, that's a drastic reduction in the overall spread of these parasites. So the spring protocol, in terms of timeline for deploying the QuailGuard, would be any time starting between March 1 and May 1. QuailGuard is labeled for a 21-day treatment period. So effectively utilizing a feeder, and we'll move into the feeders shortly, but utilizing a feeder, you could put in 50 pounds of QuailGuard and feed that out starting anytime between March 1 and May 1 for 21 days. And there's a little bit of nuance to it in terms of you don't want to have spoiled feed in a feeder. And as we get deeper coming into the summer, when we do have those spring rains and we have grasshoppers and crickets coming online, we're going to see a reduction in feeder utilization. So Overall, not everyone may have a ranch manager or live on their property or be able to strictly adhere to the timelines. I generally would say whenever you can get QuailGuard out is a good time to get it out. You do not need to feed it year round. There's no real added benefit in feeding it year round. We just need to get it out twice a year for a set amount of time. Now, if you do have lower bird numbers or you're not sure of your current bird numbers and you have the ability to maybe check in on your feeders, I would recommend, if you're thinking you're on the lower end of bird numbers, to put 25 pounds per feeder to start with, and then see kind of what the utilization is. Now, generally, what we like to do, Quail Safe, we utilize Quail Safe feeders, and we'll discuss those more, but keeping feed in the feeders year round definitely allows you to transition the birds more easily when it is time to medicate the birds. And a great tool is utilizing trail cameras on even one or two or a couple of your feeders, depending on if you've got quail in this zone, but you may not know in this zone, and it allows you to gather some sort of inventory on what kind of utilization you're getting at the feeders and maybe how many coveys you have utilizing a feeder. A question I get frequently is, can multiple coveys utilize a feeder? Yes. We've seen up to 5 coveys using a feeder, and large size 15 to over 20 bird coveys utilizing a feeder, coming and going throughout the day. We do see feeder utilization year round, and that's why we do recommend keeping feed in the feeders year round. Even in the middle of summer, frequently see broods being brought in to the Quail Safe feeders just because it's an easy high protein meal. So the spring treatment is anytime between March 1 and May 1. You don't want to wait too late if you can. So to lean somewhat in the middle of that time frame. Sometimes if you wait too late and you have some early rains and you have a lot of grasshoppers and crickets, you're going to really get a lot of birds pulling off the feeders, starting to pair up. And so ideally you can medicate as many of those birds as possible while they're still covied up and still routinely utilizing those feeders. And then you can swap out feed or just feed the QuailGuard through as it's used and add feed on top of it as you go through the summer. Quail Safe through the Bryant Grain dealer network. We're still working on distribution and getting more and more out there. On the Quail Safe feed, we do have a non-medicated version of the Quail Safe feed. It's a crumble, and it is the same formula as QuailGuard without the added medication, fenbendazole. So the Quail Safe feed is a high protein, 21% crumble that is readily accepted by quail. We spent a lot of time developing that feed in the field and just finding the best formula that would hold up well and would be readily taken to by the birds. And that is something we've got all the vitamins and minerals and amino acid profile to support a healthy wild quail. And so you can utilize that or Milo or whatever you can find at your local feed dealer. And then as we move into the fall, we're going to say anytime between August 1 and October 1, you're going to deploy the QuailGuard for the fall treatment. So on the fall treatment, you want to really lands somewhere in the middle, but it depends on the year and it depends on where you're located. But you don't want to, just as in you don't want to wait too late in the spring, you don't want to go too early in the fall where you're just not getting a lot of good utilization and it's hot, and you don't want to spoil the QuailGuard you're putting out. The QuailGuard has a good shelf life and it's fine in the feeder. I just recommend against, you don't need to put the Quail Safe feeder holds 150 pounds of feed. You don't need to put 150 pounds in on August 1. Same rule of thumb applies on, you can ease into maybe put 25 pounds in and see what kind of utilization. In terms of what does it take to medicate one bird utilizing QuailGuard, if a quail's eating, just say a wide average, just say around 20 grams a day. The way fenbendazole works, which is the active in QuailGuard, is one feeding will clear all of these cecal worms in a quail. So one daily feeding at a quail safe feeder eating QuailGuard will eliminate all those cecal worms. Now, you do have to continue to treat these birds twice a year. You know, they will become reparasitized, whether it's later in the winter possibly, but generally would be the next spring. But one feeding is going to treat the cecal worms. The additional days of feeding around safely the 6th or 7th day will treat all the eyeworms. Now, fenbendazole is a large molecule, and the way fenbendazole works is it accumulates, and it'll accumulate in the parasite. So the eyeworms are feeding on blood, and they are latched on to the back of the eyeball, which causes bleeding, swelling, edema. It impairs vision, and it also draws down energy. The cecal worm is in the cecum, which can have very high, over 1,000 cecal worms in a quail, and they're going to be in the digestive tract of the bird, which is really drawing down the energy, where you could see a heavily emaciated bird that's not, just doesn't, it's weak overall, and a weak quail is going to really struggle to survive out in the wild. And on the eyeworms, feeding on the bloodstream, the fenbendazole molecule will enter that eyeworm as it's feeding on blood. So we have to give it a few days to enter the bloodstream of the bird, and then the molecule will start to accumulate. And as it accumulates, it reduces the parasite's ability to uptake glucose. So at a certain threshold, and what we're seeing so far, and more will be coming out on this, is after about 7 days, there will be enough accumulation of that molecule that the eyeworm can no longer uptake enough glucose, enough energy to survive, and therefore it'll die. So you don't need a lot of it. I think it's safe to say, if you've got good bird utilization, this would be a 50 pounds for, go ahead and feed it out, a 21-day treatment period. If you have birds that miss a few days, that molecule does stay in that parasite. So even if they took a week off and returned and began feeding again, you would just pick up where you left off in terms of the days needed to effectively clear that bird of parasites. And once that bird's clear, you have one less carrier of the eggs, and the eggs are excreted into the fecal matter, and the intermediate hosts, the grasshoppers and the crickets, are feeding on that fecal matter, and then the quail are feeding on the grasshoppers and crickets, and that's the life cycle. So every bird that we can clean out is one less bird that is involved in that transmission cycle. So on that note, in terms of quail safe feeders, we are seeing, depending on the size of your property, the time you have to allocate management of the feeders, what your budget is, what your habitat looks like. On any given property, you may have zones that are your more quail-y zones. You've got better habitat, you're seeing more birds, and I would say generally that would be a good starting point to target. Overall, what we're recommending is 2 to 4 feeders per section. On the highest end, people that are focused on just implementing, a feeder strategy, utilizing QuailGuard and fully committed to it. On the higher end, we're seeing a feeder every 100 acres on ranches, from one section to 10, 15 sections. I would say, depending on, those variables that I mentioned previously, you can take, depending on how large your property is, take one given zone, however large that may be, and target that to start with is a good strategy. Versus other management strategies, if you look at the feeders and the QuailGuard, on a 2,500 acre ranch, if you have one feeder every 100 acres, that's on the more extreme end, I would say. And like I mentioned, we don't have to medicate every bird. But if you're all in, the Quail Safe feeder is $1,299. They're extremely well built and easy to maintain. That would be an upfront cost of $32,000. And I think the only way you can really look at this in terms of a management program is you're going to amortize that over 10 years. So you've got a management plan over 10 years. These feeders are going to last well over 10 years. They're solid steel, also utilize galvanized steel, and they're very easy to maintain, but they're gonna outlast 10 years. And so looking, at the horizon, just over $3,200 a year for 10 years. And then if you're going to utilize a full 50-pound bag of QuailGuard, which is generally around $50 at the dealer, and you're going to do that twice a year, that's $2,500 a year to utilize QuailGuard. So over that 10-year span, you're at about, with a feeder every 100 acres and implementing your QuailGuard every year, that's just over $2 an acre. Other protocols in terms of quail management, beyond some of the other higher cost items like, habitat, brush work, things like that. If we look at broadcasting milo and some of the recommended rates, you could be up to $12 to $20 an acre per year. And what we see with the feeders is we're not bringing in a lot of other non-targets with the feeders. So I'm kind of dive into the feeders now and how they work. So Quail Safe has partnered with MB Ranch King. MB Ranch King is based in Texas, and they make the top of the line deer blinds, feeders. They make all kinds of wildlife feeders, and they make exceptional products that I use and recommend to landowners that I work with in terms of other wildlife feeding products. We partnered this year to work together to integrate the Quail Safe into their manufacturing process, and we've made some tweaks to the Quail Safe that make it a little more functional, and I think overall more robust. MB Ranch King has just over 100 dealers and growing. and we'll show the MB Ranch King dealer network here. You can also go to QuailSafe.com to see the dealers and see a lot more photos and videos of the feeders. But the feeders are powder coated. They've got a galvanized floor. The feed plate is removable without emptying the hopper, and the hopper is also removable, which makes it really easy to exchange feed and easy to maintain and upkeep. I developed this feeder over the last 6 years. I live in the middle of Kent County and live on the ranch, and I wanted to develop something that was easy to manage. And these are the feeders that I use and that I developed because there was no other option on the market. And what really differentiates the Quail Safe and why it's worth it is it's a product that I think fits the needs of most of the landowners and land managers that I work with, in terms of this is a built to last quality product that is designed and manufactured in Texas. We stand by the product. We've sold just over 2,000 of these models throughout the United States, a lot in Texas. We ship, and we've got dealers all throughout the Southeast with all sorts of different applications, whether it's wild birds or pen-reared birds. But the feeders work well. We've had a great response on the feeders. If you place the feeders properly and you are thoughtful in how you lay them out on your property, you're not going to get predation around the feeders. You don't want to put the feeders under a power pole or under a tall tree. You want to tuck them into good brush or escape cover. You want to leave some open area around the feeder. The birds can kind of loaf around them. They have 4 entry holes and a clear view 360 degrees around the feeder. The birds will bring their broods in. They utilize them readily. We don't have issues with snakes around the feeders. I get a snake question a lot. We do not have high mortality in terms of predation around the feeders. It's extremely rare to see any predation. I can't, tens of thousands of trail camera images later, the feeders just work great, and they differentiate not only in quality, but they differentiate in the protection of the feed. Even in heavy driving rains, these feeders keep the feed dry, and whether it's a crumble feed or Milo or whatever you want to feed through the feeders, it'll flow through the Quail Safe, but it also will stay dry and clean and fresh for the birds. And there's no other product on the market that does that. It also keeps the sun off the feed, which is important for the fenbendazole. The sun will degrade the active ingredient in QuailGuard. So those are the last 2 things that are very important if you're going to utilize a different feeder. Is you want to make sure your feed's staying dry. That's going to keep your birds healthier and utilizing the feeders, and it's going to save you a lot of time and upkeep cleaning out gummed up feeders. And that's one thing that we have really solved with the Quail Safe, is they're going to stay dry, the feed's going to stay clean, and they're just extremely well built, and they're well utilized by the quail. There is, if you're going to try to manufacture your own feeder yourself and save some money, I think that's the primary thing, is trying to have something that's going to keep the feed dry. I think you're going to be hard pressed to make something and get it all sorted out and do it for cheaper than what we can deliver it to a dealer and sell it to you for. We've got a lot of time into these, and they just work really well. There is some starting to see some more knockoffs on the market with little creativity in the design and the pricing of the feeders. I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into these feeders, and I have gone through, if you come visit me out here, probably 30 different iterations of these, and I've worked out all the kinks, and I'm extremely proud of them, and they work just very well, and they're easy to keep up, which I think is the name of the game when you're adding a feeder to the mix and to your management program. So you can find more on the feeders at quailsafe.com. You can reach out to us, whether it's in the comments or email us, call us on any questions, and we're excited to help, whether it's Quail Safe or QuailGuard. I think overall, what we're seeing after the first year of treatment with QuailGuard is people are reporting they're carrying over more birds through the winter. We're reporting heavier birds by weight on the medicated feed ranches. We have limited data from the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch so far from this first year, but they've got a great study that they're working on where we'll be learning more. But just on this year one data on places that are medicating, we're starting to see a trend of less eyeworms and cecal worms. On the Snipes Ranch in Stonewall County, we're seeing, in terms of worm counts on the samples, we're seeing about 3 times as less eyeworms and about 3 times as less cecal worms on the birds. And Snipes Ranch is one of the properties that have been medicating for throughout the pilot programs. They've been doing this for years. So overall, we're just seeing less and less prevalence of the parasites in the birds out there and some of the other pilot properties. And I think a big consideration with the QuailGuard is you may realize some results year one, but it's not magic. Like I mentioned earlier, it's generally going to be a 3-year program to really start realizing those results. And what we're seeing year after year is in the general boom bust cycle that we see with quail, we're taking the bottom out of that bust and we're making it more of a flat line. And so just looking at the bigger picture, we're going to increase survivability just by a small margin to carry over more birds and be set up for success when all the other variables align, when we get the rains we need, when we need them, and we have more birds on the ground that are ready to get on the nest. And every additional hen we can carry over, as you know, means more and more quail that next fall. So instead of having these widespread parasitic outbreak events where it's extremely depleting, and we've tracked these events throughout the rolling plains, where it's really depleting your bird numbers, and then you have, okay, well, next year is going to be a rebuilding year, and hopefully the rains line up, and then maybe we could have some birds. We're going to just say we can take the bottom out. We're not going to peak out every year on birds, but you can carry over birds, you can increase survivability, and I think utilizing the feeders, you can also provide the non-medicated feed, whether it's the Quail Safe feed or any other supplemental feed, to help get those birds through the more challenging periods throughout the year. It can insulate you from overgrazing. The feeders can be a really nice tool as well, especially if you get into a little bit of a bind on what your feed availability is late winter we see just extremely high utilization of the feeders in late winter, especially if cover's getting sparse and we're overall depleted on our natural available feed. And I think it makes a lot of sense to select and target for the quail beyond just broadcasting a lot of feed. So beyond that, QuailGuard is available throughout Texas now. We're getting more and more dealers set up in Oklahoma. We'll put a map here of our current QuailGuard dealers. We've partnered with BWI Companies, a distribution group. They've got over 3,000 dealers throughout the Southeast. If you're not in Texas, or if you're in an area that you don't see a dealer, you could ask your local dealer if they have a BWI account. You can also reach out to QuailGuard directly and ask for more info, or where we could potentially get a dealer set up. In terms of the QuailGuard itself, there's also some we've seen some knockoffs of QuailGuard coming out. Particularly, we've seen Hi-Pro come out with a QuailGuard knockoff, which is frustrating for the sportsmen that put a lot of funding behind developing QuailGuard. And QuailGuard and the labeling that was issued by the Food and Drug Administration was funded by sportsmen, and 63% of the proceeds from QuailGuard go directly back into quail research through Park Cities Quail Coalition, which is an incredible organization that raises money and puts all the dollars they raise back into quail research. And they do an amazing job. They back a lot of the research conducted at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch. And what you can do by purchasing QuailGuard, we've got a new bag coming out. It'll be easy to recognize this fall, but your dollars are going back into quail research by purchasing QuailGuard. And I would really encourage you to ask your dealer or wherever you're buying it, and to make sure you're buying QuailGuard and not some other knockoff of the product. This project was only possible by private sportsman dollars. This wasn't. That's the only way this got done. And we would just like to see all that money that was raised can be now reinvested by selling QuailGuard, delivering a product to people that they can see a benefit from, and those dollars go right back into quail research. So make sure you ask some questions at the dealer. We're very, very excited about the results we're getting. It does take some time in terms of educating, and it takes some time implementing this process on your property. But I think it's really what I see, and what's really rewarding is it's a implementable tool that's you can easily realize the results of it if you give it a little bit of time, and it enables landowners to have something very concrete that they can do and see results. That also allows them to get more engaged, and that's what we've seen a lot of is, wow, we believe in what's going on here, and I do want to spend some additional dollars in the habitat work and whatever I can do to overall improve my property for not just the quail but other native wildlife. So I think it's an easy step forward for a lot of people, that you can realize some results, and you can start to say, okay, what are the additional steps I can take to improve my overall native habitat on my property. And that's the overall key to this. And the goal is to not just implement the medicated feed and feeders, but to allow people some hope in sustaining quail that overall engages them more in their property. And that's been the most exciting thing. So I think that is overall the protocol. I hope I answered a lot of questions today, and I hope maybe I stirred up some more questions that people will come up with. And I encourage you to reach out to QuailGuard and Quail Safe if you want to dig deeper into some of the research that's going on. You can also go to wildlifetoxicologylab.org, and the Wildlife Toxicology Lab developed the medicated feed in-house at Texas Tech, backed by Park Cities Quail and a lot of other. This is a project that was only made possible by just the land stewards of Texas and people that are interested in preserving wild quail. And so it's been a beautiful story. We've got a lot to learn. I'm here, and we've got a small team that can field any questions, and definitely check out wildlifetoxicologylab.org if you can get involved with Park Cities Quail. It's an amazing organization. Check out quailsafe.com to learn more about the feeders and the feed, and we've got a lot of other resources, and we'll be adding more resources as we go. And the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch as well will be coming out with more and more data on QuailGuard with the studies that they're conducting themselves on properties throughout the Rolling Plains. So that's very exciting. And we've got the fall treatment period coming up, so make sure you connect with your dealer. Reach out to us if you need help finding a dealer, whether it's QuailGuard or Quail Safe. And I appreciate you watching, and look forward to connecting with you.